Hey everyone, and welcome back to my Tricraftual channel. I'm Karen, and I wanted to talk a little bit today about the best art supply toolkit for beginners. So, when I started this journey this time, about 2.5 years ago, I bought everything I saw anybody using. And as a result, I have enough tools, or I've spent enough on tools to support the GNP of some small nations. Okay. If they made it, I bought it. Some of those things I have never used, never, ever, ever used. And some of them I certainly have taken advantage of. But I thought if you're like I was a couple of years ago and just not really sure, but knowing you wanted to do something art related, there were things that I got that I think are essential. So today, I just want to talk about the very basics. As you become comfortable with this art journey and find an area that you're really interested in, then of course you're going to spend more money on tools and supplies for that area. But just to get started, these are the things that I think you should have. A pad of paper, and we'll talk a little more about that in a minute. A sketchbook, a small set of colored pencils, and one of the three, and I'll tell you my preference and why. A small set of watercolor paints, a small set of acrylic paints, or a small set of oil paints. Pencils, you can start out with just number 2 pencils, but if you can buy a small set of pencils in different range of hardness that you might find necessary if you're doing a lot of sketching and shading. And so you can do that. Otherwise, just get some number 2 pencils. You probably have some in the house. And if you have children, you probably definitely have them. An eraser, and we'll talk more about that. Most of us grew up using that pink pearl eraser. And for beginners, that's okay. You'll find that there are different types of erasers for different things, and you get into that later. A cheap palette to mix watercolors in or to mix your acrylic paints. I think you use a different type of palette if you're using oil paints, but something that you can mix paint in. Now, you don't have to spend a lot of money. There are very inexpensive palettes that you can get online, or if you're near a big box store like Michael's or Hobby Lobby, or you're near an art store like Blick's, and some of the others, maybe your town, your city location has an art store, then you can look for something inexpensive there. The only caution I'm going to give you is that the really cheap plastic palettes are difficult when you're mixing and using watercolors because I don't know, watercolors and that material doesn't mix. You can use it for acrylic, and I'm guessing that you can use it for oil if you need to. All right. But I'd say get a cheap palette of some kind that you can mix colors in. You can also use old dishes. I've used seashells, large shells, which I've seen other people use. A great place to mix just one color. If you have some old chipped, broken dinnerware cups, saucers that are plain so that you can see what color you're mixing, you can use them. Paintbrushes. Paintbrushes come for your different areas: watercolor, acrylic, and oil painting. You can get 1 or 2 brushes. Again, you don't have to spend a lot of money on a set, but if you can get a cheap set of different size brushes in for watercolor, for instance, round brushes, then I would say get it. But if not, just get 1 or 2 paintbrushes. And then you have the basics for getting started. Now, we can go down a rabbit hole for each of these areas of material, but I'm not suggesting that you do that yet. Get the basics. My suggestion, and this is my belief, is that you start using watercolors. Now, if you know already and you're convicted in your heart that it'll be acrylic or oil, then do that. But if you're not really sure, get watercolor paints, all right? And did I mention getting a set of colored pencils? They can be as simple as some Crayola colored pencils, all right? Now, as you become experienced and you want to do more with them, you can spend $1 billion on watercolor pencil. On colored pencils. But for now, just get the basics. Just get the basics. Going back to pads, a pad of paper. Paper comes in all types of thickness, all types of finish, all types of color. What I suggest is that you get a moderately or inexpensively priced pad. It can be for watercolor, as I'm suggesting that you start with watercolors. Get a pad that is watercolor paper, all right? For size, I'm also suggesting that you don't go big or large, that you get something that's smaller and manageable for you to start doodling in, for you to start sketching in, or to start painting on. I suggest a size of 5x7 or 5. There's a size that might be 5.5 by 8.5. For those of you that live outside of the United States, that would be an A4 or an A5 size pad of paper, all right? The same suggestion for your sketchbook. Get an A4, an A5 that's 5.5 by 8.5 or 7.5 by 5.1. You can also get square if you'd like, if you prefer. But get something that's small, fairly small. Now, I'm not talking about teeny tiny, but something that you can carry in a bag if you're going to take it out with you, something that will be easy for you to store. You can get the big and large and very fancy later, all right? Don't spend a lot of money on the pad of paper, and don't spend a lot of money on the sketchbook, all right, which is the second thing that I suggest you buy. Now, you can spend a ton when you get into whatever medium you're going to use. Or if you're like me, and I use both watercolor and acrylic now, I have sketchbooks that I use for both. I have pads of paper that I use for each because watercolor is very different than using acrylic. And so you need a different type of paper. You can get into all that when you figure out what it is you want to do. All right. I went out and bought, I can't tell you. I took a little class through one of the online platforms. I went out and bought paper. I bought pad. I bought acrylic paints. I bought all this stuff. And then after I finished that class, which I decided I really didn't care for very much, what I was learning in that class, the stuff just sat and it sat and it sat. Now, 2.5 years later, I'm using more of it. And so none of it has gone to waste really. But I spent a ton. When I tell you I've spent a ton of money, I've spent a ton of money on art supplies, and it's just absolutely not necessary. You can get started on a small budget. Believe me, you can get started on a small budget. So look at the basic tools that I've suggested. Get the basic with the pencils, get the basic eraser, and then you'll know when you need to upgrade. I got a very inexpensive watercolor set on Amazon, and I still use those paints. Now, I have gone on to buy professional grade watercolor paints, which are beautiful. I like handmade watercolor paints, so I have a couple of people that I buy paints from off of Etsy, and I love the colors that they've come up with. But you don't have to do that to get started. You really don't. Just get the basics. You can build on any one of these items as you move forward, all right? Things like colored pencils. You can buy professional colored pencils open stock in many places. If there's an art store near you, again, on Amazon, on Blick, Cheap Joe's, you can find open stock at Michael's and Hobby Lobby, and all of those places will have open stock of things. So don't feel obligated to buy a set of 100 colored pencils like I did, um, or anything of that type, because it's really not necessary. If you're on YouTube, there are so many people that will show you how to get started in watercolor painting, in acrylic painting, in oil painting. And then once you get your feet wet, and you decide that you're really interested in learning more about this technique or this medium or that medium, then you can start picking up more items. Now, as the weeks go by, I'm going to go more in depth into each of these areas so that you can make an informed choice as you start to grow as to how much you want to spend and what you want to spend it on. But I thought it was a good idea just to give you the basics. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up and consider subscribing. We're going to go on some great art journeys in the near future. See you soon.